LLMs go beyond hallucinations all the way to acting like con men. This kind of behavior is different, I think, than just a hallucination. My point in this article is not this issue in particular, but it's that these LLMs are trained to behave exactly like con men.
Some CEO is like, oh, we were able to replace like 6 engineers with an LLM. We're so much more productive now. And the response was like, hey, we checked out your website. It's like completely broken now.
Right? Hello, how the tech are you? My name is Sylph, and I'm a software engineer, and I also sometimes write articles. And this week, I have my own article. It is LLMs go beyond hallucinations all the way to acting like con men. This article is titled Lies, Damn Lies, and LLMs, AI is a Con. I had a conversation with Google Gemini where it made up code for my own library, nymph.js. When I told it that the code didn't look right and asked it to follow the guide that I linked to, I provided it the URL to the guide, it lied about getting the guide from the internet and following along. And to be clear, retrieving information from the internet is something that Gemini has the capability to do. So it told me that it was doing that, and I could clearly see that it wasn't. Then it gaslit me, telling me that the code doesn't look right to me because of a potential misconception, assuming it meant on my part. Only when I outright called it a liar did it finally stop pursuing this path. And it was actually pretty interesting how it behaved once I called it a liar. It profusely apologized and told me that, yes, it was making up this information based on its knowledge of other ORMs. This behavior is probably because of the kind of conversations it's been trained on, and it shows that LLMs are not trained to be reliable, confident, like a large language mechanical Turk. And if you are interested in the article, I do have the entire full conversation with Google Gemini linked that you can read the entire conversation. It is long, but it's very interesting to actually see how it responds to me. It's like kind of disturbing the way that it talks, and it really does, behave like a con man. So what do you think, Matt?
The first thing I want to point out that's kind of bothered me, it's not really like a mechanical Turk, because that implies that there's a human behind pretending to be the LLM being the AI. That's kind of what the term
sure,
mechanical
but
Turk.
like I'm using the term mechanical Turk as like, it's pretending to be something that it's not. It's a con man.
Okay. Well, yeah, I would definitely call it a con man.
It's not a perfect analogy.
I did read the entire article before coming on the show, but I definitely like what you described happened. Analogies to con men definitely seemed correct.
Yeah. A lot of people, they'll talk about hallucinations, and a hallucination is one thing. The idea that the LLM can like kind of make up facts or like make up things that it thinks are real but aren't actually real. But this kind of behavior is different, I think, than just a hallucination, because not only did it get things wrong, which you could attribute that to a hallucination. The idea of like, it gave me the wrong code for an example for the Nymph ORM library that I was asking it about. And I explain why I use the Nymph ORM library in here. And it's basically because I know that the LLM's going to get the code wrong. So it got the code wrong, which you could say is a hallucination. But then when I told it, like, I don't think that's right, go to this URL and get it, the conversation proceeded as if something you would see online between two people actually talking to each other, where that information that exists in the URL is not part of that conversation, but presumably the people having that conversation will go and get that information outside of the conversation and be talking actually about that information within the conversation. And what Gemini was doing is it was generating this conversation that looked like that was happening, that looked like it was going and getting that information from the URL and bringing that into the conversation. But clearly it was not doing that. It was just making up a conversation that looked like it was doing that. And I do really want to be clear that Gemini does have the ability to go to the internet and get information from outside URLs.
Did you well, there's different like versions of Gemini you can use. You can change the little thing at the top.
Yeah, so this was all Gemini 2.0 Flash, which at the time was the latest free version that I could use on their website. So in the screenshot, you can see which version I'm using up in the corner.
Right.
But yeah, you can also read like all of my responses and its responses, and you can look at the code. And I also linked a screenshot of the URL that I told it to go look at, and you can see how different the code is that like is on that URL to the code that that Gemini was generating. Even when it was telling me that it was like verbatim copying the code from that URL. Like it told me that it was being very careful. It was copying the code directly from the URL, and now it is definitely looking at the correct code. And it just was not. It was just lying to me.
Yeah, I mean, like people sometimes have problems with like not admitting when they don't know something and just try to BS their way through it. But usually not this bad, right?
I mean, it's not
just say, I don't know.
The LLM doesn't understand what it's doing. Like it's not sentient. All it's doing is just generating stuff that looks like it's training data, right? So this conversation did look a lot like what I assume is all over its training data. And I mentioned in the article some examples of things that it could be trained on is like Stack Overflow questions and then the comments that follow them, Reddit posts and the comments that follow them, GitHub pull requests and the comments that follow them. They look a lot like this conversation where it's like a back and forth between someone who's asking a question and then someone answering it. So this conversation that it generated probably looks a whole lot like a lot of its training data. But that's the problem here is just because it looks like it's training data doesn't mean that any of this information is accurate. And its training data is training it to be confident, not accurate.
Yeah, I did that once before where I told it to go. It's supposed to be able to go to a website, and it definitely acts like it does and read the website and give you information. But I've definitely before tried to, I was writing some text based on multiple articles that I was using as sources, and it definitely just made stuff up that wasn't in the text. It was from its own knowledge. It may have been right, but it was from its own knowledge pool. It wasn't from the text that I gave it. The way that I got it to work better was instead of giving it a link to the information, I would copy and paste text into the Gemini text box. But to do that, instead of like just doing the text from the article, what I would do is basically write up an outline of what I wanted and paste that in. Yeah. So it's less text, more information dense, and that seemed to work pretty well. It seemed to be pulling from that. It's almost like you tell it to go to a website, it doesn't do it. Yeah, that would be like a way to get around this issue. But my point in this article is not this issue in particular, but it's that these LLMs are trained to behave exactly like con men. Well, I mean, like I was saying, like you give it a link to an article and it claims to read it, claims to scan it, and it's clearly not doing it. That's obvious. At some level, that's a con. The other thing I thought was interesting is like you would went through all this stuff, and you mentioned how it was trying to gaslight you into believing it did something that it wasn't doing. Yep. Or like it's very similar tactics to what some con men do to gaslight their victims, which is surprising. Yeah, and again, like I don't think that the LLM like understands at all what it's doing. Like it doesn't know that it's lying. It doesn't know that it's making these things up. It is doing exactly what it's been taught to do. It's generating a plausible looking conversation that looks like it's training data.
The problem is, like, there's kind of two problems here. The first problem is the training data. It's just trained on a bunch of like copyrighted material that's not, it wasn't meant to train an LLM. So it's like not in the format that you would want to train an LLM in. You know, it's in this format where there's just like kind of URLs in these topics, like in these discussions, but that information isn't actually brought into the discussion. So like the first problem there is that you're training on the wrong data, because like you just kind of have to, because if these companies had to produce all that training data themselves, they wouldn't be able to afford it. They have to steal information, steal these copyrighted texts and use them in their training data, because, you know, this business model is just kind of based on crime, I guess you'd say. It's like, you know, you can't do it without committing a bunch of crimes, basically, is what I'm saying. So that's kind of the first problem there. And the second problem is the way that people talk about these and the way that they're sold to us. You know, they're sold to us as like it's your own, robot that you can, and to be fair, they do say like it can produce inaccurate results. You should double check these results. But people talk about these machines saying, you know, things along the lines of they're experts in all these domains, or they have an IQ of like 168. You know, all this fantastical language talking about these, when really these machines are just con men. They're just con men. You talk to an LLM, you're just talking to a con man.
Yep.
No. So those are kind of the two big problems that I am trying to point out in this article. People should understand what they're talking to when they're talking to an LLM.
I agree. And I feel like your take on the subject is a pretty good one. So I hope everybody reads the article.
And people talk about like companies replacing employees with these LLMs, like companies replacing engineers with an LLM. Would you hire a fucking con man to be like your lead engineer? No, of course not. Something I mentioned in this in the article is like, if I'm interviewing someone and they behave the way this LLM did, you know, I ask them like, hey, can you mock up like an entity for like storing notes in the Nymph ORM library, and they go like, oh yeah, absolutely, I'll do that, and they just make up something that is completely wrong. In my notes for that interview, I'm gonna tell, you know, the hiring committee, do not hire this person. Under no circumstances should you hire this person. I asked them about this library. They obviously didn't know the library, which is fine. Like, it is totally fine in an interview to be like, oh, I'm not familiar with that. Can you ask me about something else? Like, here are the things I'm familiar with. Like, I would not dock someone any points for that. But it is absolutely not okay as an interviewee to pretend to know something and just make up your own example. And that's what the LLM did here. If an interviewee did that, yeah, my notes would be, do not under any circumstances hire this person. They will lie about what they know.
I remember reading something online recently where somebody posted, I think it was probably, it came from Twitter. I don't really watch or read Twitter, but somebody posted, it was like some CEO is like, oh, we were able to replace like 6 engineers with an LLM. We're so much more productive now. And the response was like, hey, we checked out your website. It's like completely broken now.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Congratulations. You hired 6 con men.
That's right.
Yep. Oh, but they're so cheap.
That's right. Yeah, and I hear a lot of complaints about people are like, yeah, you can get LLMs to write code for you, but like, A, you don't know if it's going to work. So a lot of the code it writes just doesn't work for reasons that you just talk about. But the other one is it writes a lot of insecure code as well. And people like, there's like the whole like vibe coding thing that's going around right now. People have been pointing out like so much of this code is horribly insecure.
Yeah, like so in my own projects, first of all, I've never used an LLM to generate code and then put that code into my product. All the times that I've ever used an LLM to generate code, it was just out of my own curiosity. And second, if someone were to submit code that was like clearly generated by an AI, I would immediately like decline it. Be like, nope, I'm not putting that in my project.
Right. You have good reason to do so.
Yeah, even if it looked good, which if it looks good, it's probably not written by an LLM. But yeah, LLMs kind of have this like way of writing that you can kind of just tell that an LLM wrote something. And it's the same in code.
Right.
I can kind of, I mean, I'm to-pay fallacy. I don't know for sure. But like when I look at something that is stated to be written by an LLM, it kind of does look like it's written by an LLM. So, I hope that I could tell, but obviously, I wouldn't know if I couldn't tell because I couldn't tell. Thank you for tuning in for How the Tech Are You? We do this show every week and we put it out in segments on YouTube. If you'd like to check out our other shows, you can do that at echoplexmedia.com. And if you'd like to support us, you can do that at patreon.com/echoplex or eplex.store, where you can buy our swag. Check us out live at twitch.tv/echoplexmedia. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And there should be another video on screen in one of these places. Go ahead and click on that video and keep watching. Have a great tech and week.